Stop explaining yourself. Because the more you explain, the less people respect you. That sounds harsh, but it's one of the most important psychological truths you will ever understand. Most people believe that clarity builds respect. They think if they just explain their intentions better, defend their actions clearly, and justify their decisions logically, others will finally understand them. But reality works differently. According to Professor Eleanor Whitmore, people do not measure your value by how well you explain yourself. They measure it by how much you feel the need to do. And that difference changes everything. When you constantly explain yourself, you send a silent signal. You communicate uncertainty. You reveal that you are seeking approval instead of standing in confidence. And people notice this instantly. Not consciously, but psychologically. Because human beings are wired to read behavior, not just words. They observe tone, timing, and emotional energy. And when your energy says, "I need you to understand me," it places you in a lower position. This is why over-explaining slowly reduces your authority. You may think you're being clear, but others interpret it as insecurity. Professor Eleanor Whitmore explains that confidence is not proven through explanation. It is demonstrated through restraint. When you are certain about your decisions, you do not feel the need to defend them constantly. You allow them to stand on their own, and that creates power. Most people struggle with this because they are uncomfortable being misunderstood. They want everyone to see their intentions correctly. They want to avoid judgment at all costs. So they explain more and more and more until their words lose weight. Because when something is repeated too often, it begins to feel less valuable. Think about it. If someone keeps justifying the same decision again and again, you don't see them as confident, you see them as unsure. And that perception becomes your reality in their mind. This is where the silent shift begins. Instead of explaining everything, you start choosing what actually deserves explanation. Not every opinion needs a defense. Not every action requires justification. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. According to Professor Eleanor Whitmore, selective communication is a sign of psychological strength. When you decide carefully what to say and what to leave unsaid, you take control of how others perceive you. Silence becomes part of your message, and often it becomes the most powerful part. There's also another hidden reason why explaining yourself weakens your position. It invites judgment. The moment you start explaining, you give others the authority to evaluate your reasoning. You place your decisions in their hands, even if you don't realize it. And once that happens, they feel entitled to question you, to challenge you, to analyze you. But when you simply state your decision and remain calm, you remove that invitation. You make it clear that your choices are not open for negotiation. And that changes how people approach you. This does not mean you should never communicate. It means you should stop over-communicating. There's a difference. Strong individuals speak when necessary. They clarify when it matters, but they do not chase understanding from people who are committed to misunderstanding them, because they know something most people don't. Respect is not built by convincing others. It is built by how firmly you stand without needing to convince. And once you stop explaining every move you make, people stop questioning it as much, because certainty does not need constant validation. It only needs consistency. And the moment your actions start speaking louder than your explanations, is the moment people start listening differently. Every time you explain yourself, you lose a little control. Not loudly, not visibly, but psychologically. Because the moment you start explaining, you shift the balance of power in the interaction, and most people never realize when that shift happens. According to Professor Eleanor Whitmore, control in any conversation does not belong to the person who speaks more, it belongs to the person who is least dependent on being understood. And that idea changes how you see communication completely. Think about it. Why do you feel the need to explain yourself in the first place? It usually comes from discomfort. Discomfort of being judged. Discomfort of being misunderstood. Discomfort of not being accepted. So you try to fix that discomfort with words. You try to make everything clear. You try to remove doubt. But in doing so, you reveal something deeper. You reveal that their opinion matters more than your certainty, and people sense that immediately. Professor Eleanor Whitmore explains that human interactions are driven by perceived need. The more you appear to need approval, the less power you hold in that moment. Because need creates imbalance, and imbalance invites control. This is why people who explain too much often feel ignored, interrupted, or dismissed. It's not because their words lack logic, it's because their energy lacks authority. And authority does not come from speaking more, it comes from needing less. There is also a hidden psychological pattern that most people overlook. When you explain something once, it informs. When you explain it twice, it reinforces. But when you explain it repeatedly, it weakens. Because repetition without necessity signals doubt, and doubt reduces impact. According to Professor Eleanor Whitmore, the brain assigns value based on perceived certainty. When your communication feels excessive, it lowers the perceived strength of your position, even if your logic is correct. This is why some people say very little, yet command attention, while others say a lot, yet get ignored. The difference is not intelligence, it is restraint. And restraint is rare. Most individuals feel an urge to respond immediately. They want to correct every misunderstanding. They want to defend every decision. But strong individuals resist that urge. They pause. They evaluate, and then they decide if a response is even necessary, because they understand something critical. Not every silence is weakness. Sometimes it is control. When you choose not to explain, you create space. And in that space, something interesting happens. People begin to fill the silence themselves. They start thinking. They start analyzing. They start questioning their own assumptions. And this shifts the pressure away from you. Now, instead of you trying to prove yourself, they are trying to understand you. And that reversal changes everything. Professor Eleanor Whitmore explains that silence, when used intentionally, creates psychological tension, and tension forces attention. People pay more attention to what is not said. They become more curious, more observant, more careful. This increases your presence without increasing your effort. But here is the truth most people avoid. If you want to stop explaining yourself, you must become comfortable with being misunderstood. You must accept that not everyone will agree with you. Not everyone will see your intentions clearly. And not everyone deserves an explanation. Because once you stop trying to control how others perceive you, you start controlling how you present yourself. And that is where real power begins. Not in perfect communication, but in selective communication. Not in constant explanation, but in calm certainty. And once people realize that you are not trying to convince them, they begin to take your words more seriously, because now every word you choose to speak feels intentional. And when something feels intentional, it automatically carries weight. The moment you stop explaining yourself, people start treating you differently. Not because you changed what you say, but because you changed what you allow. And that shift is more powerful than most people understand. According to Professor Eleanor Whitmore, people are constantly testing the limits of your behavior, not always intentionally, but through small interactions, reactions, and patterns. They observe what you tolerate, they notice how you respond, and over time, they adjust how they treat you based on those signals. This means every time you over-explain, you are not just communicating, you are training people. You are teaching them that your decisions are open for discussion, that your choices require approval, that your position can be negotiated. And once people learn that, they use it. They question you more, they challenge you more, they push your boundaries further, because you showed them that those boundaries are flexible. But when you stop explaining, something changes. You create a clear line, not through words, but through behavior. You begin to respond less. You stop defending every choice. You allow silence to exist without rushing to fill it. And this creates a new pattern. According to Professor Eleanor Whitmore, consistency in behavior is what builds identity in the minds of others. When your actions become predictable in their strength, people begin to adjust automatically. They become more careful, more respectful, more aware, because now they understand something important. You are not easily moved. There is also a deeper transformation happening inside you. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop seeking permission. You stop waiting for approval. You stop needing validation for every decision you make. And that creates internal stability, a kind of stability that cannot be shaken by opinions. Professor Eleanor Whitmore explains that internal stability is the foundation of external respect. When you are grounded in your choices, people feel it, even if you say nothing. Because confidence is not something you announce, it is something you project. And projection does not require words, it requires consistency. Most people never reach this level because they are afraid of losing control over how others see them. They try to manage perceptions. They try to control narratives. They try to explain themselves into acceptance. But acceptance built on explanation is fragile. It depends on constant effort, constant reassurance, constant communication. And the moment you stop, it collapses. True respect works differently. It does not come from explanation. It comes from alignment, from acting in a way that does not require justification, from making decisions that stand on their own, and allowing others to either accept them or walk away. This is where the silent power becomes complete. You are no longer reacting. You are no longer explaining. You are no longer negotiating your worth. You are simply living in a way that reflects it. And that reflection changes everything. Because people no longer see someone trying to be understood. They see someone who already understands themselves. And that creates distance. Not negative distance, but respectful distance. The kind that makes people think twice before questioning you. The kind that makes them adjust without being told. The kind that turns silence into authority.